His back was covered in bruises. Deep, angry welts, purple and blue, running along his shoulders and down his spine. Her breath caught in her throat. What happened to him? Weeks had passed since she last saw or even heard from Jason, but the silence was gnawing at her insides. Vivian was sitting in her living room, trying to concentrate on the book in her hand when it happened again. A loud bang, followed by a crash and a piercing scream. What in Mother Earth's name was going on in his apartment? Her heart skipped a beat, and her grip on the book tightened. The sound was unmistakable. Something heavy hitting the floor in Jason's apartment. The air in her chest became heavy with the memory of the last time she heard those sounds. She tried to ignore it, gripping the edges of her chair, her pulse quickening. Just leave it. It's not your business. But something inside her couldn't let go. Before she knew it, she was at his door again. She knocked harder this time, her hand shaking, fear coiling in her stomach. What the hell are you doing, Vivian? Walk away. No answer. The hallway felt too quiet, suffocating in its stillness. She knocked again. The door creaked open just as her fist met the wood, sending a cold shiver down her spine. Jason stood there, leaning casually against the doorframe. His hair was tousled, his eyes sleepy, but unlike before. There was no tension in his body. He didn't look angry. In fact, he looked calm. Too calm. "Vivian," he said smoothly, his voice soft. "Is everything all right?" "I heard something," she replied cautiously. Jason raised an eyebrow, stepping aside casually to let her in. "A crash?" "Oh, yeah, I knocked over a lamp. Sorry if it scared you. It's fine." His tone was so casual, it made her skin crawl. This wasn't the same man who had practically thrown her out of his apartment just days ago. She stood there confused. The room was clean, orderly, too perfect, as if it had been scrubbed of the chaos from before. The man standing in front of her wasn't the same one from the other night. The man with bruises and scars darkening his skin and rage in his eyes. Jason noticed her hesitation and gave her a strange, comforting smile. "Come in. You look like you've seen a ghost." She blinked, her legs moving on autopilot, following him inside. "What the hell is going on?" "Jason," she began, voice tight with confusion. "What happened the other night? You weren't like this. You kicked me out. You had bruises." He cut her off with a gentle laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, that." He sighed, walking over to the window and staring out. "I've been going through some stuff. Family things. I didn't handle it well, and I'm sorry for how I treated you." Vivian's stomach clenched. Family things? That explained nothing. He was brushing off the incident like it was nothing, like she hadn't seen something she wasn't supposed to. She wanted to scream at him, to demand an explanation, but her voice stuck in her throat. She almost asked about the bruises on his back, but something held her back. "Don't push him. Not yet." Instead, she nodded, forcing herself to look calm. "Okay. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm good now. Really. In fact," he said, perking up, as if nothing had happened at all. "There's this concert next week. Thought maybe you'd want to come with me. You know, get out of our heads for a bit. What do you say?" Sure," she found herself saying, the words slipping out before she had time to think. Jason smiled, a boyish grin that lit up his face. but something in his eyes was off. They weren't quite focused, like he was trying too hard to maintain the facade. "Great. I'll see you then," he said, his voice soft, dismissing her as if everything was back to normal. But as she left, the unease gnawed at her, clawing at her insides. They arrived at the venue to an immense crowd, everyone clamoring impatiently for the concert to begin. Jason, who stood beside her, was almost vibrating with excitement. He was smiling, more alive than she had seen him before. It was infectious. As the lights dimmed and the first notes of the music filled the air, she found herself swept up in the moment, her earlier worries fading into the background. The bass pounded through the speakers and people ran toward the stage. Jason grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the center of the crowd. His energy was magnetic, drawing her in. The music seeped through their bodies, and as the beat kicked in, Jason turned to her, grinning like a kid. "Vivian! This is it! My favorite song!" he shouted over the music. His face lit up with pure joy. It was his favorite song, one he had mentioned at least 5 times on the way there. The crowd screamed as the artist launched into the first verse, and Jason's voice joined the chorus, loud and wild. She laughed, unable to resist his contagious charm. She sang too, their voices merging with thousands of others, their bodies moving in sync to the rhythm of the music under the flashing lights. For those moments, it felt perfect. Jason was present, alive, and completely wrapped up in the music. Nothing else mattered here. But when the lights flickered mid-performance, Jason stopped dancing, completely. His hand slipped from Vivian's hand, as if the music had taken the life out of him. Vivian turned to look at him, confusion written all over her face. He wasn't smiling anymore. He had a frown etched on his face in an instant, his expression drained of warmth, his face cold, as though he'd been switched off. "Jason?" She touched his arm, but he didn't respond. He stared straight ahead without blinking, his body rigid. "Jason?" she repeated louder now, trying to shake him from whatever had gripped him. Nothing. His eyes didn't even flicker in her direction. He just stood there, as if frozen in place. Vivian's heart began to race. "What's happening?" Before she could say anything else, Jason turned abruptly and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned. He didn't even say a word, just left. She watched him disappear into the crowd, her mind spinning with so many questions. What the hell was that? Minutes passed, and Vivian stood there, staring after him, her heart beating faster by the minute. Just as she was about to pack up and leave, Jason reappeared, a wide grin on his face, holding 2 drinks. He handed her one as if nothing had happened. "Having fun?" he asked, his voice as light and casual as ever. "This night is amazing." Vivian blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his mood. "Yeah, it's been great," she replied cautiously, eyeing him. She couldn't just ignore what had happened. Jason clinked his cup against hers, smiling. "I can't wait for them to play my favorite song," he added excitedly. "That's when the real party starts." Vivian's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, her hand tightening around her cup. "Jason, your favorite song. They already played it. We danced to it. You were..." She stopped herself, watching his face for a reaction. He blinked, his smile faltering. For just a moment, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. No, they haven't. I'd know if they had." Vivian's stomach twisted. "You're serious? Jason, we just danced to it. You were..." She shook her head. "You don't remember?" Jason's brow furrowed in confusion, but then he laughed, a sound that felt forced. "Maybe I've had too much to drink," he said, brushing it off. Vivian forced a smile, but something dark gnawed at the back of her mind. How does he not remember? On the drive home, they both sat quietly in the car, the earlier excitement from the night ebbing away. Jason, hands on the wheel, hummed softly to the music playing on the radio, the glow of the streetlights flickering through the windshield. Vivian broke the silence. "It was a great night," she said. His voice was light, carefree. "The only problem I had was that they didn't play my favorite song." Vivian's breath caught. She turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. "Jason, they did play it. You were there. You danced." Jason didn't reply. His eyes were focused ahead, as if he hadn't heard her. At that moment, they stopped at a red traffic light and waited quietly for it to turn green. Vivian stared at him, her chest tightening with unease. He turned toward her, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "You look beautiful tonight," he said. His eyes softened, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal again. The light turned green, but Jason didn't move. He just kept looking at her, smiling. But then, without warning, his expression changed. The smile left his face, replaced by a frown, leaving his eyes looking dark and without emotion. Vivian's heart jumped into her throat. "Jason!" The honking of cars behind them was so loud, but Jason didn't react. He just sat there, completely zoned out, staring into space with a look that scared her shitless. "Jason!" she screamed, panic rising in her voice. Suddenly, he blinked, snapping back to reality. His face returned to its normal expression, the confusion clearing. "What's going on?" he muttered, looking at the green light. "Oh, right." He laughed awkwardly and pressed on the gas, moving forward as though nothing had happened. Vivian's hand trembled as she gripped her seat. She turned to look out the window, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. As they continued driving, she noticed something strange. They were passing the same intersection again, the same traffic light. "Jason," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Why are we back here? We drove past this traffic light a few minutes ago. You just drove in a circle." Jason glanced at her, his face completely relaxed. "What are you talking about? I would know if we've been here before. Sit tight, we're almost home." Vivian's blood ran cold. She didn't have the strength to argue with him. As she trembled in her seat, all she wanted was to get home safe and stay as far away from this guy as possible. Something was definitely wrong, so wrong. Vivian had been mindlessly pushing her cart down the aisle, still reeling from the strange week she'd had. She wanted to clear her head, just get some groceries and go home. Jason was the last person Vivian expected to run into at the supermarket. As she turned into the cereal aisle, there he was, casually leaning on his cart, scanning the shelves. "Fancy bumping into you here?" he said with a small smile, his eyes glinting in the fluorescent light. "Haven't seen you in a while." Vivian froze for a moment, locking eyes with him before quickly looking away. She didn't want this conversation. Not here, not now. She just wanted to grab her groceries and leave. "I've been busy," she muttered, trying to brush him off as she moved toward the oatmeal. "Oh, she's finally speaking to me," Jason replied, his tone playful but laced with something she couldn't quite place. Vivian's brows knitted in confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jason shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I've been texting you. No response. Thought maybe you lost your phone or something." She sighed, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "Like I said, I've been busy." Jason's smile faltered, and his gaze lingered on her as if searching for something. She turned back to the shelves, hoping he'd take the hint and leave her alone. But he didn't. Instead, he trailed behind her as she moved through the aisles. His presence felt suffocating. "If I've done something to upset you, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I really like you, Vivian." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, but she didn't let it show. She stopped and turned to face him, her jaw tight. "If," she repeated, her tone sharp. "You really have no idea, do you?" He blinked, clearly confused. Her heart raced as she stared at him, waiting for any sign that he had remembered their last encounter at the concert and the crazy traffic light incident. But there was none. "What are you talking about?" was all he asked, still waiting for an explanation from her. Her jaw clenched, her anger bubbling up again. She scoffed, shaking her head, and walked away, before she could say something she'd regret. Behind her, she could feel his gaze burning into the back of her neck, but she didn't turn around. At the checkout line, just as she was about to pay, Jason appeared beside her. Without a word, he reached past her, handing the cashier his card. Vivian opened her mouth to protest, but he waved her off, refusing to even acknowledge her attempt to stop him. Once the transaction was done, he nodded curtly and walked out of the store, leaving her standing there, groceries in hand and a sour taste in her mouth.